Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My job is to take the 7 years' worth of work and put it inside of 16 minutes so that we invoke the rules of the speed talkers and speed listeners of America. But there will be lots of time after. But I hope to be able to sketch out to you, especially for the benefit of those of you who haven't had a chance to read the document, what the essence of our proposal is. We started this initiative at a really tough time, right at the height of the Second Intifada. But at the same time, it was the moment at which the Geneva Accord was published, and that gave us, as was said earlier, a very interesting foil. We really admired the work done by the Geneva group, but noted that the Accords follow the kind of classic conception of the peace process, which involves dividing everything, including the Old City of Jerusalem. And our view from the start was that the Old City merits an exception to this general rule of dividing everything up, that it's too important to be treated that way. Early research in our project involved a review of a monumental book by Ruth Lapidoth, a book called Whither Jerusalem. That book contains the text of over 60 proposals dating back to the 1930s for how to resolve the issue of Jerusalem and in particular its holy city. The proposals range from the corpus separatum that the UN came up with in 48-49, and then a whole series of special arrangements, UN arrangements, third-party arrangements, international arrangements. Whenever the authors of these various plans came up to the question of the mutually exclusive sovereignty claims. The problem was, from our point of view, that while people talked about these special arrangements, very few people took any trouble in trying to describe what that would mean. And so our modest contribution to the search for peace has been to develop a special regime idea in some detail in hopes that future negotiators and policymakers might eventually find it useful. Now, why just the Old City? Originally, we called ourselves the Holy Basin Initiative, but once we'd walked the ground around Jerusalem and saw what the basin involved, we realized very quickly that there could be no easily agreed on definition of what the Holy Basin is. It just does not have a totally natural demarcation. And the one definition we've got is, the Holy Basin is how long it takes you to schlep a body outside the walls and get it into the ground before the sun goes down, was proved very hard to deal with. It was easy enough in Jerusalem to get a body, but very hard to get a jackhammer to dig in. So, in any event, on the other hand, the Old City itself is defined by its walls. It contains the most important, contentious, and internationally resonant of the holy sites, plus a population of Israelis and Palestinians, Muslim, Jews, and Christians living in a close proximity that is quite unique in the whole of Israel-Palestine. Designing a governance scheme for the Old City was very complex, and as you've heard from John, very time-consuming and difficult. But there was, as far as I can recall, the key breakthrough came when somebody asked a very simple question. Is the special regime about the people who live within the walls? Is it about the population? Or is it about the place and the place itself and the unique hold its holy sites have on the faith and imagination of millions and millions of believers around the world? When you pose that question, then the answer became obvious. And our decision was to focus our concept on the place and to avoid positioning the special regime between the Palestinian and Israeli residents of the Old City and their government, except where it was absolutely essential from a security point of view. And that distinction of place and people is critical to the model that I will shortly describe to you. John characterized our proposal as a heavy special regime. And it's true, it is a heavy special regime. We deliberately designed for the most challenging post-peace circumstances we could imagine. And let me just give you one example of the kind of of choices that we confronted as we got into it. On the security side, if Jerusalem, as capital of both states, is an open city, an open metropolitan area, where people can move freely around with minimum inspection, crossing of checkpoints, and that sort of thing, then the business of securing the old city it sits in a context that is actually relatively simple. But on the other hand, if in the context of a peace agreement, the Jerusalem itself is divided by a hard border, possibly even a wall, and the old city's gates then, as a result of that, have to function as international border crossing points, then you're dealing with a very different set of demands. And it's for this second type of choice that we designed the security arrangements, and when we came to those kinds of crossroads throughout the process, we always chose the more demanding scenario to design against, on the understanding it's easy to shed things, but it's harder to imagine design responses to complicated issues. And so we've tried to imagine, as I said, the hardest way of doing these things. Our special regime is embedded in and grows out of an Israeli-Palestinian peace treaty that establishes a Palestinian state. It cannot be imposed. It must be the creation of the two sides with a little help from their friends. And the treaty itself must contain the mandate for the special regime and the administrator who runs it. Whether the treaty assigns parts of the old city to either of the parties, or whether, as we think more likely, it defers the whole question of sovereignty to a later time. Our conception of the special regime is that it treats the old city as a single whole. And we hope that such a treaty would also take into account, particularly if sovereignty is deferred, that the special regime is not there to prejudice future sovereignty resolutions between the two parties.